Hello everyone, I am Dr. Dhananjay, your ethics teacher. Today we will start with the introductory lecture and we have named it Ethics and Introduction. So this whole course of ethics will have a separate video on syllabus, distribution of hours, etc. But today we will focus on introduction part itself so that you all have a background of whatever we are going to cover in the upcoming classes. So let us start. So we will start with the quote of none other than Mahatma Gandhi, and the quote reads as, "Morality is the basis of things and truth is the substance of all morality." So we can split this quote into two parts, one being the morality is the basis of things, and second is that truth is the substance of all morality. So when Gandhiji said this, he meant that the difference between animals and human civilization is that of morality. And by morality, he referred to the principles which govern a good human life. We'll read the word and the principles in detail in the upcoming slides. And if we see the second part, that is truth is the substance of all morality. By truth, what Gandhiji wanted to refer to is that truth is the sole basis of human existence. For someone who's not truthful is a weak individual, and morality is a component of personality of strong individuals only. So he related morality with strength and strength with truth. So for him, being truthful was a measure of how strongly moral the individual is. So this forms our premise for study of ethics, that first part is being moral and second part is being truthful. And now both these terms, they can be subjective, and we'll see various connotations of morality, ethics, subjectivity, relativism, objectivism, etc. But for now, let us move on to the other quote. So this one is, "A man without ethics is a wild beast loosed upon the world." And this famous quote has been said by Albert Camus. He, at the age of 44 years only, got the Nobel Prize, and he was the second youngest recipient of Nobel Prize in Literature, and that was in the year 1957. So, by this quote, he meant to say that man without ethics. So here he was referring to a man without ethics as an individual who's savage, who's rude, who's uncivilized, right? So why the very fact that human beings, they are not supposed to be savage and uncivilized or rude? So why they are like that at the first place? Why didn't the nature create human beings without these issues at the first place? Is a natural question that comes to our mind. So the answer lies in the evolution of human species itself. So initially, the instinctive traits of aggression, procreation, they were very essential for survival of human species, because there were a lot of species to compete for the space of habitat and other avenues, natural resources, etc. But since now the species is established, as such, we don't need these traits anymore. On the contrary, removal of these traits is very essential for maximizing the potential of human beings. So if a man who does not have ethics is supposedly, left to roam around and do whatever he likes, so he is like a beast loosed upon the world. So these days we are seeing very unique things like we could not have even imagined earlier. Like there have been shooting incidences in schools in United States. So the whole society of USA was caught off guard. I mean, how can kids of the age of 8 and 10 years, they use guns and shoot, their fellow mates, teachers, etc. So these questions, they again ensure that ethics and morality, they have taken center stage, and the society at large, it needs to focus on these aspects more than it has been doing, till now. Well, so the question arises, I'm sure you all must be preparing for civil services, but if you leave this aspect aside, we all should read ethics. The question arises, why? Why a kid of 10 years of age, or for that matter 5 years of age, needs to be taught ethics? So I have tried to reason out the same in the next slide. So, the whole reasoning can be classified into 4 heads. For me, the first one is to solve ethical dilemmas. Like when we were a kid, even then we had dilemmas. Suppose a kid has 2 toys to choose from. You know, there is some amount of confusion in a young mind as well. And in this age, if you talk about adults, there can be a lot of ethical dilemmas. The most commonest being the choice of food. Like one part of our brain is compelling us to have junk food, and the other part is saying that, well, to have a good physical health, we have to abstain from it. So this is a very common ethical dilemma, but there can be extremes of ethical dilemmas as well. The one very common example that comes to mind is that trolley problem that you all must have read or heard about in the famous Harvard University lectures. That is very much discussed there. So that in that problem, I'll try to enact the whole situation that is given there. Suppose you are a train driver and the brakes have failed in the train, and you can see that at some distance ahead on the track there are 5 workers working there, and if you're definitely bound to not be able to stop the train, you are going to crash those 5 workers and they are bound to die. But suddenly you see that there is a side track as well, which emerges after maybe 10-20 meters. You can turn the train towards that side, but on that track as well there is one single worker, right? So now the question is whether you will take the turn towards the side track or you will continue going on the track you are going on. So now in both ways you are killing people. On one side you are killing 5, on one side you are killing 1. So on one side there will be an act of commission, even on the part of omission as well. You commit a crime and you kill a man there. So it's a very serious kind of an ethical dilemma. So to study similar sorts of ethical dilemmas or to have answers to them at various stages of life, one needs to study ethics. The second reasoning for me is to create uniformity in behavior. Well, we just talked about the laws, gun laws in USA. These days we are seeing suddenly kids, they have started using guns and they started using it as well. So that clearly refers to a situation wherein the kids or the people at large, they are not behaving as they are supposed to behave in a civilized society or as per the norms and standards set up by the society at large. So ethics is very much needed as far as society is concerned to create uniformity in behavior. Well, the third reasoning is to control appetites and impulses. What are appetites? Appetites are generally the blind drives towards something which does not know reasoning or which does not know rationality. To quote some examples, I would say the appetite towards junk food, towards sexual desires, and uncontrolled appetites can lead to a plethora of social and political issues as well. And impulses as well. See, peer pressure is a very good example in this case. We have seen the state of affairs in Punjab, wherein a lot of young people, they are afflicted by this drug menace. So what I want to tell is, more the reading of ethics, more the understanding of ethics one has, better chances of control over impulses. So ethics becomes very crucial to control appetites and impulses and to increase the power of reasoning and rational discourse within the individual as well as within the society. And the last part I would say is for character building. What do we mean by character building? I mean, most of you would have read moral education books at a very young age, maybe at the primary, secondary, middle school levels, etc. So the very purpose was character building. So that by character building we refer to creation of individuals who are emotionally mature, who can stand for what they think is right. Now this reminds me of that famous midnight speech by the first Prime Minister of India, Shri Jawaharlal Nehru, in which he said, I want men who can stand for what they think is right. So this for me is the essence of character building, that knowing what is right, controlling the emotions to do what is right. So for that part, ethics plays a very crucial role. Teachings of, saints, of famous philosophers, or our freedom fighters in India's case. So all of it creates an atmosphere wherein we can expect kids or younger generation to come up as stronger individuals who have strong characters and who have the strength to stand for correct things in the society. Right. So the next part is definition of ethics. So I have tried to, although most of these definitions, they are somehow overlapping, or there is some amount of, similarity as well as difference between all of them. But I have tried to pick up some 5-6 unique definitions wherein the overlap is minimum. So ethics are a system of moral principles or rules of behavior. So the catch is moral principles. So these moral principles, they lead to creation of rules of behavior. What are these moral principles? So the very famous ones are justice, honesty, character, leadership, etc. So these moral principles, the very famous moral principles which are universally accepted in all quarters of society, they lead to formulation of a set of rules of behavior which are expected from individuals to carry out, and which lead to that uniformity that we were talking about. So ethics, we have to see it that ethics majorly deals with the social perspective, that how a society should be like. And it focuses less on the individual side but more on the social aspect of behavior as well as morality. The second part is it studies the norms and standards of right and wrong used to judge actions, right? So right and wrong, they seem to be very subjective, and the most colloquially used sense of ethics is that ethics are subjective. They vary from societies to societies, they vary across time and space. So what ethics tries to study is the norms or standards of right and wrong. So things which are in consonance with the moral principles, which are universally accepted, they can be considered to be right, and those which are against it are wrong. Like we just mentioned, justice, law, justice, honesty, etc. So this is the second definition. And ethics is about the choices that we make or fail to make. So the catch for me here is choices that we fail to make, because there are other institutional arrangements as well. For example, law is one wherein it clearly deals with the choices that we make, whether those choices are in consonance with the legal framework or not. For example, I'll tell you, suppose you are driving on a road and you see someone is bleeding on the roadside. You very well know that if you don't take the person to the hospital, the person will die. And you decide not to take that person to the hospital, reasons may be whatever. So in that situation, that act of yours will be considered to be unethical but not illegal. So you will never be punished in the court of law, but the conscience or the morality or the the prevalent social morality or the standards or norms, they would always tell you that you have committed a wrong. So the ambit of ethics is larger than law in that sense, because it also deals with the choices that we fail to make. So it deals with commission as well as omission. So the fourth definition is that ethics explains the guiding principles to decide what is right and wrong. So we can see that this is nothing but a mixture of first and second definitions. So moral principles, which we have called guiding principles here, which help to decide what is right and wrong. So there are some universally accepted fundamental principles which we call moral principles, and those moral principles, they help in deciding what is right or wrong, that we have already discussed. So we have been constantly grappling with two words, morality and ethics. So I would like to clarify the meaning of these two in the sense of our ethics syllabus as well as requirement of the exam, that is civil services. Morality refers to the individual level reasoning and judgments judgments of the individual itself. So it is an intrinsic character more than an extrinsic one. While ethics is a social trait which deals with, the prevalent principles in the society as such. So when I am talking about morality or moral principles, I am referring more to individual judgments or individual awareness of the levels of, norms and standards that one believes in. But while we are talking about ethics or ethical principles, we are referring to the prevalent or universally accepted norms or standards in the society. So this distinction must be clear to all of you. So next part is ethics is equal to morality plus reasoning. So how is ethics established and how do we reach to a point where we can say that, well, this is ethical, this is unethical? For that, I just told you that morality is more of an intrinsic or a personal thing. If the whole society or the set of individuals, they reason out amongst themselves or within themselves and they somehow derive a consensus and they come to a situation wherein they they are able to agree to certain sets of principles. Those principles we start calling as ethics. And the second one is conduct in ethics means moral conduct or the moral life. What do we mean by moral conduct or moral life? In this case, we can always say that the morality or the moral conduct refers to whatever the personal best of an individual is or the personal ideals of an individual portray him or her to believe. That for me, to my mind, is the moral conduct or the moral life. And to teach young kids or younger individuals about moral life, we generally use philosophers, famous leaders, achievers, people who are doing good in the families, etc. So by all this, we try to create a perception of a moral conduct and a moral life, which we can always teach the younger generation to adhere to, so as to keep following ethics in their life. The next is ethics is primarily concerned with the standards that regulate our judgments of right and wrong. So we have used the word judgment here, judgments of right and wrong, standards that regulate our judgment. So now we have to see some wordplay here. Till now we were discussing that ethics are the standards and norms itself. Now we have tried to dwell one layer deeper. Now we are talking about the standards that regulate our judgment itself. They are not just the standards which are prevalent in the society, but they also are the standards which cause us or which regulate our judgment of right and wrong. Means we are talking about the attitude now. The very perspective with which we look at ethics or which we'll look at morality. So ethics is a very broad arena and there are a lot of sub schools to it that we'll see later in the upcoming slides. Right, so the word moral judgments, judgments has led us to moral judgments now. So these moral judgments, they are a very essential component of ethical life, ethical discussions, ethical discourse. So we will read this term moral judgments in the following manner. First is that is based on content itself and form or attitude. So this basically forms the how part and this is the why part of it. In how part as well, that how one goes about making the moral judgments or how one reaches towards the conclusion of judging whether something can be considered good, bad, ethical, unethical. For that, we can split it into two, one being the perspective of an individual or the ability of an individual to judge higher and lower within the one's own self. And the premises of judgment is based upon the knowledge, culture, spirituality, etc. So these are the some very common tools which one can use to ensure that one is good at judging whether something is right or wrong within one's own self. Now, we have very often hear about a life of spirit versus a life of flesh, a noble life or a coarser life. So by that we mean that some individual who's focusing upon a charity or maybe kindness, someone is generous, he is considered to be a nobler being, and that self is obviously he would have achieved by that internal discourse within oneself, which has allowed him to create moral judgments which are derived from a good knowledge, a good cultural prism or perspective, or someone being spiritual to the extent that it helps in knowing what is good and what is a good behavior and what is not. While the other aspect is one's treatment of others, and there are a lot of traits which we can count here: justice, sympathy, benevolence. They are a few that I have written. So these are the traits which I would say they refer to the ability of individuals to treat others in the way that we can call that, well, he has a good moral framework and he has a good ability to judge making correct moral judgments, and that aspect is based on if whether one has these qualities or not. These are justice, sympathy, benevolence, etc. I mean, there can be a lot of other, honesty can also be included here. So this first dimension was how one is supposed to make moral judgments, or how one goes about the whole business of making moral judgments, or how does the whole mind and body of an individual helps in reaching towards correct moral judgments. The second part is why at the first place one should be good at making moral judgments, or what are the traits, I mean what is the attitude or perspective through which one should approach the whole question of making moral judgments, and that can always be derived from the ideals, the ideal way of life that we all have been taught to live. And the very famous names come to mind, that is Mahatma Gandhi and Immanuel Kant. So basically it's the categorical perspective of ethics. So to introduce this part in a very short manner, I must tell you there are overall two perspectives to ethics. One is the consequentialist perspective and the other one is the categorical perspective. By consequentialist perspective, we are referring to the school of thought which says that the end result of an action should be the sole criteria to judge whether an action is ethical or not, right? The utilitarianism school of thought, it comes under that consequentialist perspective itself. The second one is the categorical perspective, which we are referring to here, wherein the ideals or the normative ethics, they are taught to individuals that how an individual, how a society should actually be, rather than it is the way right now. So according to that perspective, it gives a platform or a premise on which the whole attitude of an individual should be based upon. So for example, I would like to point out that the religious scriptures like Ramayana and Mahabharata, they all try to create that ideal sense of an individual which we all as social beings should look towards, right? So in the last slide we saw how moral judgments are significant, how they are formed, and why, or the question of why a human being should form moral judgments, correct moral judgments at the first place. So now we understand that ethics, morality, they are based upon the moral judgments of individuals which help them in determining what is correct and what is wrong, and the definition of correct and wrong, it is based on the prevalent ethical standards or practices in a society, and that in turn is based upon the moral principles which guide these ethics and norms. And those moral principles, although they can be influenced by the prevalent social and cultural norms and standards, but they are more to do with the personal conscience or the intrinsic traits of an individual. So this I guess forms a cycle of or the broad sequence of whatever we have read till now. Now we will see common concepts used in ethics. specifically in the human actions. This I have, we have a table, we have a circular arrangement of these 4 traits. They somehow overlap as well, but there is a slight difference that only study of ethics can address. Otherwise, we all can generally use all these terms interchangeably in our daily life. We keep doing it, but when it comes to ethics, we have to see them very precisely. First is appetite. Appetites, as we saw initially in the first or the second slide, they are the blind drives towards particular ends. So these drives are blind. The word blind here refers to that these drives are bereft of reasoning or rationality. The individual, while following an appetite, is not using one's higher mental faculties. So there are more chances of him or her getting into a wrong habit or a wrong act or a wrong action, which most of us would call unethical. Like, for example, I would say here is eating junk food, driving recklessly, or see the habit of the sexual desires which one is not able to. So these are appetites which individuals are not able to control. Second is the impulse. Impulse is a sudden, strong and unreflective urge or desire to act. So these impulses, although they might not lead to action all the time, but there are chances that individuals out of impulse will do unethical stuff. For example, like we were discussing in the appetite case as well, the impulse of binge eating, the impulse of shouting and yelling, the impulse of, we see in a lot of young individuals, the impulse of hitting someone, the moment the argument gets heated. So this we can categorize as impulse. And wish is a desire that prevails and that is effective. See, I have a desire to become rich, right? So that desire might have come on momentary occasions. I might have gone to some relative's house and would have seen the wealth he or she has accumulated, and we would always want that, well, I or we could have also been richer. So that is a desire that came momentarily. So that we categorize as desire. But suppose that desire persists for a long period of time, that is prevailing and that is effective as well. Effective in the sense that it is guiding my psyche, so that I somehow, either I am planning to act towards that, or I have started acting subtly or in a small manner, to say that. So that we will call as a wish. And what is good here? We have been hearing the words right and wrong, good and bad. So the good is anything which men consciously desire. Here the word men refers to virtuous men. So we just cannot consider men as religious bigots, or for that matter terrorists, or men who are not virtuous. So the word men here strictly refers to men who are virtuous, who follow good morals, good moral principles, which they consciously desire. That we can call as good. And by consciously we mean that they are not under appetite or impulse. So that it's not a blind drive, or it's not a sudden and strong unreflective urge or desire. It's consciously thought of decision or virtue or value. Further, we have also some similar looking terms: purpose, intention, motive, beliefs. See, purpose is a simple aim or intention of something. That the purpose can be short term, long term as well, right? So it's a very simple dictionary meaning. Aim or intention of something is purpose. And from here we get the word intention. So intention is, suppose if to say that a higher degree of purpose, wherein that aim is adopted as an object of will. So that the word, the object of will here refers to the fact that that feeling or that desire or that aim that is propelling you to think more on it, or to let the thought, go on in your brain, or you are processing upon it, you are working upon it. So that purpose takes the shape of intention. So a purpose which stays for a longer period of time, it leads to intention of doing things, or intention of wanting something, or acting in a particular way. So gradually we are moving towards, higher degrees of purpose, and now a higher degree of intention will be motive. And by motive we understand that something that moves men or causes them to act in a particular way. So this whole chain is moving more towards action now. So we have three terms: purpose, intention and motive. And motive is the final output of intention, we can say that. It moves men or causes them to act in a particular way. Motives can be positive as well as negative. Like we have heard this famous term, motive behind the murder. So that is used in a negative sense in cinema a lot of times. We have heard the trials. The other positive motive can be motive of charity, that if you want to create goods in the society, if you want to ensure the welfare of the disadvantaged people, we go for charity. So that is a positive motive. So that motive moves you to go for that charity. So action is most closely related to motive out of these three terms. So although they are very similar looking terms, but we need to understand the thin line between them. Now we move on to beliefs. So beliefs is something you accept as true. So beliefs is a very personal stuff. It can be rational, irrational, whatever. Something you have been believing or you are ready to believe true for a maybe substantial period of time, that forms a part of your belief, right? So now we move on to values. So values is a higher degree of belief now. So beliefs that motivate people to act in one way or the other, right? So these values can also be personal, but they are more universal if we compare them to beliefs. So beliefs which are closer to action, means which are motivating individuals to act in one or the other way. So values, by values we understand commonly that values are, we just discussed about honesty, which is sincerity, punctuality, etc. These are considered as common values. So these values, they ensure that individuals adhere to a particular set of actions regularly. So values are determinants of actions in that manner. The other one is norms. We have used this word earlier, norms, standards, etc. They are a very crucial part of ethics. They are the accepted social practices that guide human behavior, right? So these norms, they vary across time and space, but they have been guiding the human behavior wherever they are prevalent, right? So these norms can pertain to maybe spiritual framework, the religious framework, political framework, etc. But they form a very crucial part of human behavior. The next is principles. Well, they are very similar looking words, but principles are norms or values, or the moral rules that are considered universal in nature. Suppose a norm becomes universal, that we start calling as principles, right? Because for example, if we say that honesty is a very good quality, right? So that would lead individuals to believe that being honest is a virtuous thing, and it leads to becoming a good human being. The norm would be that the honest human behavior or the honest behavior of individuals would be appreciated or would be accepted as such. But the principles will be that individuals will stick to the honesty as a principle. It means that it ensures maximum adherence to actions due to these values, norms or principles, right? So here we have considered them moral. They pertain to the moral domain more than other domains. So moral rules that are considered universal in nature. Now the two words morals and ethics we just discussed. Desired values and beliefs about what is right or wrong, acceptable or unacceptable in a particular situation, and they are the guiding principles to decide what is right. So generally the definitions seem to be more or less on a similar footing, but we have tried to reason out the slight difference, that morals, they generally refer to the intrinsic traits or individualistic aspects of ethics, while the word ethics refers to the prevalent social standards of moral principles, so to say. Now let us see the branches of ethics. Normative ethics. It is the study of ethical theories that prescribe how people ought to act. So basically people might be acting in a particular way, but it does not study only that. It more than that, it studies how they ought to act rather than how they have been originally acting. So it's a very broad framework of ethics. Second is the descriptive ethics. We'll see these aspects in detail when we go for separate lectures topic wise. So this is the introductory part, so we'll see all of it in a very short manner. The other one is the descriptive ethics. Descriptive ethics is the study of people's beliefs about morality. It is actually how people think they should act, or how people are actually acting on the basis of moral principles. So this is a study of how people are actually believing rather than how they ought to do, which was in the case of normative ethics. So this branch also takes the help of other branches like anthropology, etc. The third one is meta-ethics. So meta-ethics is the study of what ethical terms and theories actually refer to, right? It tries to get one layer deeper than mere meaning, terms, terminologies, concepts, etc. It tries to dwell deeper in the manner that the whole genesis of the concept itself is discussed in this branch, like why ethics at the first place, the origin of all the terminologies related to ethics like morality, principles, ethics, etc. So that part is dealt with in meta-ethics. One more branch which is very commonly used these days is applied ethics. This is probably the most relevant one as far as civil services is concerned. It attempts to apply ethical theory to real life situations. So it refers to the code of conduct, ethical code of conduct, which we generally see in the case of doctors, lawyers, etc., policemen. There are well prescribed codes of ethical conduct in those professions. So beyond that, it also tries to address famous social or maybe moral dilemmas that the society is facing. A few that come to mind are euthanasia, abortion, etc. So the whole discourse is based on applied ethics, how the universal moral principles, they are utilized or they are used to debate these famous controversial issues. Well, the last part of this introductory lecture shall be evolution of ethical thoughts. We will try to see the whole journey of ethical thoughts, and we will focus specially on Indian thinkers and Indian philosophers, and we will just try to see all of them in brief, maybe one or two sentences. But we will also see the global individuals or philosophers who have had an influence to the famous Indian school of ethics as well. So in this table I have tried to arrange them in a chronological manner, but I cannot assure that these are strictly as per the chronological sequence of NCERTs or maybe some famous source. I have tried to utilize various sources, so let's not be very sure about the chronology of these famous influences on ethical thoughts in India, but these all have been very crucial, that I can assure you. So these are in short the famous schools, individuals who have casted a very deep and lasting impact on evolution of ethical thoughts in India. So we will see them one by one, right, from the ancient era itself. First is the Vedas. The Vedas continue to guide the human psyche or the major part of Indian society till now, because the Indian spirituality, more or less, it originated from Vedas, so to say, and it continues to be based on it in most cases. So Vedas, they deal with worship, nature, Vedic ceremonies, yajanas, sacrifices, yoga, spirituality, social structure, etc. So the whole framework of society itself comes from Vedas. And well, if we go beyond metropolitan cities, these institutions of caste, religion, the spiritual setup, all of it still relies more on the our ancient scriptures like Vedas. The one word that catches eye is yoga. Well, we all know how crucial yoga has been in projecting India's influence abroad, and this concept of yoga itself comes from Vedas, and we'll see all of it in detail while we go for detailed lectures on these parts. The second one is Upanishads. Well, Upanishads, they were the reasoning light of Vedas. They are philosophical texts which well, we have seen in Vedas that it's a prescription of methods, sacrifices, yajanas, etc. But in Upanishads, we try to reason out. So they can be considered to be the most egalitarian ancient scriptures as far as our ancient land of India is concerned. So Upanishads, the word self-consciousness, it means the knowledge about the existence and nature of Brahma. This word Brahma means consciousness of our own real being, the primary reality. So it's talk about deeper questions of self-consciousness. And our primary reality is the consciousness of our being. And that consciousness, that can be generated through spiritual methods which are discussed in Vedas as well as Upanishads. So it forms a very crucial part as well. Now we can never overstate the significance of Buddhism and Jainism to this day, even for the fact that the adherents or the people who follow these sects, that has been dwindling or that has not increased to the extent one would have expected, for the fact that they are the most egalitarian sects, so to say. But still they have casted a very deep imprint on the psyche of young minds as well, because they have created that sense of awareness and about equality of treatment, non-violence, etc. So even to date, they continue to be as relevant as they were maybe before a century or two. So they oppose ritualism, formalism, caste divisions. So basically they were born as a reaction to orthodox Brahmanical setup of the Indian society at that time. In the 6th century BC, there came a time wherein the oppressed part of the society, the ritualism or the orthodoxy, it reached to a level where as a reaction to it, such sects like Buddhism and Jainism, they were born, and they were against the established practices or rituals, and they also tried to consider all castes as equals. So here we have written the long spelling of caste. So that is against ritualism, formalism and caste division of Hinduism. Non-violence, serenity, compassion and this Madhyam Marg. The virtue ethics of Aristotle also talks about the means, and on a similar line, the more ancient Buddhism of India, it talks about the Madhyam Marg, wherein the extremes are advocated not to be followed. It should be a middle path between all the extremes. And in Ramayana, we deal with the noble character of Lord Rama, and it talks about 3 kinds of morality. That is the individual, that is the individual, social and kingly morality, right? So the character of Lord Rama, it depicts how an individual should be like, and the society of Rama, Lord Rama, which he presided over as a king, how that society should behave is also, you know, somehow learned from the famous mythological character of Lord Rama, and how a king should ideally behave, irrespective of whatever is his personal leanings or whatever is his personal choices. How a king should ideally be behaving is something that one can easily learn from Ramayana. And this whole mythology is of immense spiritual significance, and it is most often said that Ramayana is happening in our own body. You know, those sorts of struggles that the famous character of Lord Rama had to undergo, those struggles are continuously being witnessed inside human's body itself. So that is why it's a very, you know, essential aspect of human spirituality, especially in India. The next is Mahabharata. Mahabharata is more of a story, an interesting story which discusses personal virtues as well as royal virtues. So it's that conflict which keeps going on between, you know, how a person is and how one is supposed to behave, both in the personal setup and in the royal or the political setup. And this Mahabharata discusses statecraft, and for the first time diplomacy and the just war concept came into being. Like we discussed that it was non-violence, serenity, compassion, etc. in Buddhism and Jainism, but war as a method of diplomacy as well as a method to ensure that the evildoers are punished, it came into existence in Mahabharata, where, you know, brothers had to fight amongst each others. The next is Bhagavad Gita. So it is considered the most important Hindu religious text, and the core of it lies in the word Nishkam Karma. And what is this? It is a central theme and an important philosophical concept in Karma Yoga. It means to act unselfishly or without personal gain in mind, right? So it's the propensity to act without fear of, you know, results. And it again, if we precisely say, it talks about the categorical perspective of ethics, that the method has to be correct, not the end result. You don't have to worry about the results, you do your duty and you focus on the correct and the ethical process itself. So the next is Sophism. Sophisms, they were somehow contemporary to Socrates. They were the first to deny the existence of universal objective moral standards, and they advocated moral relativism. And they said that morality depends on condition in particular societies, on historical circumstances and intellectual attitude. This would seem to be a very natural statement these days, but that was not the case in those times, because they were the first political philosophers or ethical philosophers who denied the existence of universal and objective moral standards, and they had the, you know, guts to say that the morality, it varies across time and space. It depends on historical circumstances as well as intellectual attitude. So the whole premise of noble characters and legendary stories of famous, you know, characters of in Greek mythology especially, it was challenged, and it was said that the whole concept of morality should be seen in the light of moral relativism or moral subjectivism, which we will see later. So now the great Socrates, so he was someone who not just, you know, lectured on philosophy or morality, he followed them, and he said knowledge is virtue. This is the most famous quote of Socrates. So he related, he was not ready to accept that someone who has a knowledge of correct thing won't do the correct thing, because he himself used to practice whatever he thought is right. So in that sense, he always used to believe that for someone who knows the correct thing will do the correct thing. So he professed that knowledge is virtue. We might disagree to many of us might disagree to this right now, but this to date stays as the one of the most famous contributions of Socrates to ethical thoughts. and he was concerned with the quality of his soul and that of others. He examines how we should live. This led him to discussions on various virtues, things like wisdom, justice, courage, piety and so on. So, he throughout his life, he kept discussing, he kept the discourse going on these issues. And he was primarily concerned with the quality of his soul. And for that, he dwelt upon knowledge. And for him, knowledge generates virtue, and that virtue leads one to develop, traits like wisdom, justice, courage, piety, etc. So, the next is his disciple Plato. He was the author of Socrates' dialogues such as Apology and his Republic. And Plato considered reality to consist of eternal and unchanging forms. Right? He considered reality to be constant, objective. Right? And he identified these 4 traits as cardinal virtues. So, they are fortitude, justice, prudence and temperance. These 4 although we will see all this in detail, but let's see for the 4 traits: fortitude, justice, prudence and temperance. And he considered that all other human virtues are based on these 4 virtues, which he called them as cardinal, very significant to the existence of human being. So, he is also a major contributor to the whole ethical framework. So, the next one is Aristotle. Aristotle, we can say, is the first philosopher who wrote systemically on ethics. His very famous book is Nicomachean Ethics, which even to date people read a lot. He discussed virtue ethics, and he regarded virtue as a mean between 2 extreme qualities. Like, for example, he said that bravery is a mean between cowardliness on one side and rashness on the other. Right? So, he always believed in the mean of virtues, that there are 2 extreme qualities and in the middle of it stands the virtue. Now, the next one is Arthashastra. It was the first treatise in India on statecraft, administration, war, diplomacy and state regulation of economy. So, it also deals with kingly morality to a great extent, where the king Chanakya was advised, where Chanakya advised King Chandragupta about statecraft, morality of a king and state administration, etc. Now, the other one is Stoics. These Stoics, they believe that they somehow professed austerity and asceticism. So, these keywords should be remembered here: austerity and asceticism. And they always said that one is supposed to maximize positive emotions, reduce negative emotions and help individuals to hone their virtues of character. And these Stoics believe that wealth, status, power, position and stature, they are neither good nor bad, means they had a very neutral stance about that, and they have no social importance with respect to a relationship with one another. So, they didn't consider these aspects like wealth, status, power, position, etc. as crucial to human existence or human life. So, they profess that austerity and asceticism should form the basis of lives. One should not run after wealth, power, possessions, etc. And the positive emotions is something that helps in building characters. So, the next is Epicureans. These Epicureanism, the theory of Epicureanism is a form of hedonism. Hedonism means pleasure-centric philosophy, insofar as it declares that pleasure to be the sole intrinsic goal. The concept that the absence of pain and fear constitutes the greatest pleasure, and advocacy of a simple life make it very different from hedonism as colloquially understood. Right? So, although it is closer to hedonism, but it is not same as hedonism, because the concept that the absence of pain and fear constitutes the greatest pleasure. So, there are 2 aspects to it now. We will have to see it very clearly. For hedonists, the sole aim was to maximize pleasure, and for Epicureanism, the primary purpose was to reduce pain and fear. So, that in turn would lead to pleasure, more pleasure. So, the way colloquially we understand hedonism, so somewhat it is different from Epicureanism. So, now we have 2 Christian philosophers. One is the Saint Augustine. He established anew the ancient faith. So the faith which was being continued for a long period of time, he suddenly added new dimensions to it. Although he was criticized to some extent by his contemporaries, but later on he became known as the founder of Western philosophy and Western Christianity, so to say. His most famous quote is very relevant even today. There is no saint without a past and no sinner without a future. Right. So this was his idea of morality, that for someone who is a criminal today might not be a criminal yesterday, and for someone who is a saint today might not be the same or might have been a criminal yesterday. So he always believed in doing correct thing at the correct moment. The other one is Saint Thomas Aquinas. He was a firm believer in God, and he considered God as a source of both the light of natural reason and that of the light of faith. So it seems very irrational, so to say, that the whole premise of reasoning he tried to derive from God itself, right? But his most famous quote, if we read it, to one who has faith, no explanation is necessary. To one without faith, no explanation is possible. So he was a firm believer that the faith in Almighty, the faith in God, can lead to a human being ethical or moral. So his contribution is that he keeps God as at the forefront of natural reasoning and faith. And his reasoning or his morality is derived from the same belief in God itself. Next is Descartes. He was a Stoic, and like Stoic, we said that he tried to, like Stoics who tried to focus on austerity, more on austerity, right? So he also read metaphysics. He argued that the theory of innate knowledge and that of humans were born with knowledge through the higher power of God. He also believed in God, right? And he tried to reason out the question of natural existence and try to address the question of existence of God and the principles that are driven from nature and God itself. So, and he professed that there is the theory of innate knowledge that goes to his credit, and that all innate knowledge means that all humans were born with knowledge through the higher power of God. That God has itself instilled certain amount of knowledge into all the beings who are born, means human beings are innately knowledgeable. So this is what he used to say, and based on that innate power of knowledge, one can keep building upon his psyche or ethics, so to say. Now Hobbes, you must have heard the name. He is a materialistic thinker. He is Epicureanist, and he said that men are egoistic and hungry for power. So he, to his credit goes the famous social contract theory, right? So the social contract theory was the method of justifying political principles or arrangements by appeal to the agreement that would be made among suitably situated, rational, free and equal persons. His concept of society or social contract was that men, they have together decided to give away some rights or make an arrangement in which there are certain principles and certain norms which guide the whole bunch of individuals together, and it helps in realization their rights as well as their meaningful existence. And all those persons, according to him, who come and make that agreement, they should be rational, free and equal persons. So he focused more on the materialistic aspects. Guru Nanak, he was a famous monotheistic saint in India, on whose name the whole religion of Sikhism has been founded. He was a monotheistic and human brotherhood. According to Guru Nanak Dev, salvation occurs from the heart, spirit and soul and not from the pilgrimage. And maybe to the surprise of many of you, he was against this concept of bathe in holy water. And he also never wanted to create a separate religion altogether, because he was a monotheistic and human brotherhood. And according to him, the salvation light occurs from the heart, spirit and soul, and not from the pilgrimages which we see are being done on his name these days. Now, the other one is sentimentalism. Sentimentalism opposed Hobbes. It said that because Hobbes was somehow focusing upon the materialistic aspects, and the sentimentalists, they argued that morality is grounded in sentiments or emotions only. And they profess that the emotions are the premise of moral judgments, and men are not basically supposed to be categorized as materialistic or Epicureanists or hedonists, etc. It's the emotions that lead to various kinds of judgments that are made by the individuals. So, they focused on the sentiments or emotions. Intuitive school, they focused on common sense, that human being, they are intuitively good enough to perceive right and wrong. So, this was in the very close to contemporary times this school originated, and so this is how they have structured the whole society, right? And they have always felt that the human common sense or the very existence of human being is good enough to let him have a perspective or attitude which enables human being to perceive what is right and wrong. One does not need a lot of external influences to make such ethical decisions. But it didn't, it was not one of the most famous schools, so to say. And the other one is rationalistic morality. So, it's a view in meta-ethics according to which moral principles are knowable by reason alone. So, last one we saw, last slide or last slide was about the sentimentalism or the school based upon emotions. Now, this is a school that is completely bereft of emotions, which says that moral principles are knowable by reason alone. So, it's the reason, the rationality that leads to individual getting to know moral principles and behave accordingly. So, this can be the flow. Reasons inform the judgments, and these judgments, they motivate the actions. The next one is utilitarianism. It was the school professed by Jeremy Bentham. We'll read about Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who were the two most famous proponents of this school in detail in later lectures. But for now, we should see that utilitarianism is a morality that advocates actions and that foster happiness or pleasure and oppose actions that cause unhappiness or harms. So, in short, they have to maximize utility. By utility, we mean maximization of pleasure and minimization of pain. So, when directed towards social, economic or political policy making, utilitarianism philosophy would aim for the betterment of society as a whole. So, there are a lot of oppositions to it as well. So, we will see the oppositions as well in detail. Meta-ethics. Now, meta-ethics, we have already seen it once. It refers to nature of ethical terms and concepts and to attempt to understand the underlying assumptions behind moral theories. So, it focuses on ethical attitudes and judgments and the premise of origin of concepts of ethics itself. Right. So, it's the one of the latest branches of ethics. So, after meta-ethics, I would like to tell you a very significant contributor which I have not put in the slideshow, and that is none other than Mahatma Gandhi, which we need to read in substantial detail. So, we will cover Gandhiji in detail in the forthcoming lectures. So, this was our last slide, and this ethical evolutionary chain, you can always remember, or you can always jot down some bullets in short, so that it helps in revision at the end. So, but the whole evolution of ethical thought comprises of the thinkers and philosophers which we have just said. Beyond this, we will also read a lot of moral thinkers which pertain to India, which we have not mentioned here, famous bureaucrats, about famous political scientists, their views, their contributions, etc. But all of it was a very brief introduction about ethics as a subject. We'll have a separate lecture on syllabus and the course, etc. in the due course of time. So this was all for the ethics introduction from my side. Thank you. Have a good day.